Welcome back to Learning Through Experience. I'm Dr. Heidi Brooks, and we're taking a look at how we can learn through our everyday experience. It's right there in front of us. Can we learn our way through life? So a big part of learning through experience is being able to attend to our experience, pay attention to our experience and how it's impacting us and how we're impacting others. One of the key kind of sources of data, if we can call it data, is our emotional life, how we are impacted emotionally. So today we're going to take a look at emotional wisdom and giving ourselves permission to feel and how to deal with our emotions. The guest today, my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Marc Brackett. Marc Brackett is the founding director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. He's a professor in the Child Study Center at Yale University and author of the best-selling book, Permission to Feel, which has been translated into 25 languages. An award-winning researcher for 25 years, Marc focuses on the role of emotions and emotional intelligence in learning, decision-making, creativity, relationships, physical and mental health, and workplace performance. He's the lead developer of Ruler, an evidence-based approach to social and emotional learning that has been adopted by over 5,000 schools across the globe, improving the lives of millions of children and adults. Ruler infuses the principles and skills of emotional intelligence into school systems, enhancing administrators, how they lead, how they show up, how educators teach, how students learn, and how families parent, a really broad lens. It's been proven to boost academic performance, decrease school problems like bullying, and enrich classroom climates, reduce teacher stress and burnout, and enhance teacher instructional practices. I'm so excited to welcome and to introduce you to guest Dr. Marc Brackett. Welcome to Learning Through Experience.
Great to be here, Heidi.
Yeah, no, it's really great to have a chance to talk with you. I
Yeah.
wanted to invite you in because this season, there's just season 3 of this podcast. The podcast is meant to lift up the pedagogy that I'm in, which is obviously learning through experience and experiential pedagogy. Because at Yale we do most things in a brain-bound kind of way. We think really well about things, and that's enough for delivering on purpose. And yet I teach in a different pedagogy with it, which I think also adds powerfully to people's capacity for excellence. And we have a course which pays a lot of attention to emotion, and so really wanted to talk to you. I love Permission to Feel. And what you have to contribute to the world is powerful. I wanted to invite your voice in to help us wisen up and see what I could learn from you in this conversation. So we always start with this question about lived experience, basically. So you've written so beautifully about your experience being bullied and talking with your uncle. But I wanted to ask you this specific version of the question, which is what do you think of as a life experience that you're willing to talk about here that led you to this like fascination with emotion, and what you've done with it?
Yeah, well, I mean, the to be frank with you, I've thought a lot about this, and the feeling that I have is that my emotional life was robbed from me as a kid.
Mm,
So, well, of course, I had emotions, but I didn't know what to do with those feelings, where to go with them, who to talk to about them. And so, what did I do? I just locked myself in my room. I screamed, I cried, I ate, I did all kinds of things that were,
mm,
as we say now, maladaptive strategies.
mm,
Um, and so, in addition to just having a pretty tough childhood around bullying, I was also abused, sadly, by a neighbor from the time I was 5 to 10. And, not that I need to go into too much in detail about that, but I think what's relevant is that for years, people would ask me, why are you so motivated, to run around the world trying to get people to talk about their feelings and teach them the skills of emotional intelligence? And I would usually say things like, I hated school, I was bullied.
mm,
And the true story is that, I feel like I was robbed of my emotional life, as I said, because I had this horrific stuff happen to me, but I had no voice, I had nowhere to go with that. And so, I had two parents who loved me, but they had their own troubles. And so they weren't really very available. And again, what do you do when you have no adults when you're a kid to talk to about your feelings? You repress deny, etc. And the last thing I'll just say about that was, you mentioned my uncle, and he just came into my life at the right time, at the right place, with the right content, because Uncle Marvin happened to be writing a curriculum to teach kids about their feelings. And so, who could imagine someone who was going through my experience and then had an uncle who moved in with them, who was writing a curriculum to teach kids about feelings. And so,
Mm.
with all the pain, there is much to be grateful for.
Hmm. You mentioned maladaptive strategies. I used to pay a lot of attention to some of the kind of resilience literature, and some of that was about adults who wind up being a buffer, kind of protecting people as part of adaptive strategies that we can't always design or train in. Am I tracking with you around that?
Yeah, I just think that, it's this whole thing about emotional intelligence that people don't really understand. That, it's not, we all have an emotion system, whether we want it or not. And for some of us, our emotions help us to achieve our goals. But for many, many people, our emotions derail us from achieving our goals because we experience strong, intense, usually unpleasant feelings, and we don't know what to do with them. And so, what we learn without getting a doctorate in psychology like we both have is we learn, to yell, to scream, to eat, to deny, to repress, to suppress, to just not use our feelings wisely to achieve our goals.
Hmm.
So, my mission, right, is to make sure that everybody gets an emotion education. And I don't think it stops. My primary work, as you know, is in preschool to high school, college, but I also do plenty of consulting in the workforce. And honestly, people who are living in senior citizens homes need this too, because their life experience is changing dramatically in terms of their peer networks, etc.
So I mean, so humans across the spectrum, whether at work or at school or living in assisted living, have emotions, and your mission is to give people permission to feel and to be able to use adaptive and wiser strategies.
Exactly. To really understand those feelings and to learn how to strategize with them. And I think it's important to say that it's not about getting rid of the feeling. So, for example, I just have anxiety. I've had it for I'm 55, and I've just been living with it. Years ago, I used to think, oh my gosh, Mark, your job is to find the doctor who's going to like carve out that area of your amygdala and your hippocampus, and you're just going to you'll be free from all
Mm.
this, the overwhelm. And then, as I was writing my at 48 permission to feel, I was realizing wrong mantra, Mark. You
Mm.
know, why not just be with your feelings? Just because you're having an intense, unpleasant feeling doesn't mean you have to allow that feeling to have so much power over you. And I think that's so important for people because people get lost in their intense emotions. And if we can learn effective strategies to be with those feelings and, learn how to shift them when necessary, life can just be so much easier.
Mm. It's like an acceptance pathway rather than a
Yeah.
fix
Yeah, there's
strategy.
nothing to fix. I mean, there's an emotion system for a reason. Some of us just, from genetics, from other forms of biology, from nurturing, just have a system that operates differently. And I think that we're brought up thinking that if we experience a lot of unpleasant emotions that are intense, like somehow or another we're mentally ill, or somehow or another there's something wrong with us.
Mm.
And the truth is, as we know from working with people at a place like Yale, a lot of people have anxiety. They're quite productive. As a matter of fact, I always joke I like to hire people who have moderate levels of anxiety because they actually get stuff done. Um, and but again, what makes emotional intelligence special is that it's about using those feelings, recognizing them, understanding them. Am I anxious or am I overwhelmed or am I stressed? Am I just worried? And then feeling safe and comfortable to express those feelings with people at home, at work, and then obviously, having the strategies. Because, for example, if I'm like a mess, which I was this morning, I had a disc. We're in the city. We have alternate side of the street parking. It's freaking annoying. I'm too cheap to find a parking spot. It's ridiculously expensive. I'm like, that is. My father would never speak to me again if I paid for this spot. He's already passed, but he'd come down and come alive and say, "Are you out of your mind?" And I feel the same way. But what am I doing? I'm like schlepping out to the car, sitting in the car, realizing I got to do this. I got to set up my camera. So I was kind of like all over the place. Then I'm just like, Mark, take a deep breath. Like, you got some, be grateful. You got a chance to talk to Heidi.
Mm. Well, I'm really glad for a chance to talk with you, and it just made you're. And I do think you should have a parking space. So I'll just add that because that's a
Thank
that's a really easy location. So, but people have crazy lives these days. I mean, like there's a way in which so many people would resonate with the idea of just like we're running around, we're so busy, so much demand, and so the anxiety and the kind of like sense of like neuroticism that presses our days comes from our individual like shape of our lives, but also comes from kind of like personality preferences.
you. Yeah.
Our organizations, of course, like can be anxiety promoting places because we think it has to do with high standards, and maybe it does actually. Um, but can do a little bit more of a kind of basic ask for people who have this idea that emotions don't belong in the workplace? I'm in the School of Management and joint with the law school, two kind of industries that aren't quite sure what to do with emotions. And management isn't an industry exactly, but certainly corporate workplaces often have the spoken or unspoken rule: keep the emotion at home. So, what's your take? What do you tell people around this?
It is, it's not a simple question
Yeah.
because I do think that, I'll just give you an example. So I've gotten permission to share this. My former executive director, who came from Wall Street, came to work at the center, and he like came up to me. He's like, Mark, like, how much time do I have to dedicate talking to the staff about their feelings? You know, and I'm like, a lot more than you were used to.
Mm,
Um, and he's like, I just used to pay people a lot of money to like do their work, and if they didn't like it, and I just give them more money. I'm like, well, guess what? It doesn't work that way here. And so like there is this balance, and I do believe that
mm,
we are paid to work, not to talk about our feelings all day,
mm,
but yet we have feelings all day, and we need an outlet to discuss them.
mm,
And I was thinking about this just yesterday. For some reason or another, like if I say to you at work, how are you feeling, Heidi? There's this weirdness of like, oh, fine, good, okay. We keep it really simple and like we move on. However, if you were with a colleague who just really pissed you off, you're going to want to talk to me for an hour and a half about it. You're going
mm,
to be like, I can't believe it. Can you believe what he said? Can you believe what she did? I can't take it anymore. You're going to talk about your feelings forever. And we've seen that's like more acceptable, like the gossiping or kind of the venting. And I think maybe we can shift that around a little bit. My job as your colleague, when you are venting and is to say, all right, Heidi, I get it. Yeah, that person is difficult, but let's look at this from this perspective. Or is there another way you might see it? Or how much time do you really need to spend with this person, really? And
mm,
just try to get you to kind of deactivate and shift so that you don't perseverate, or ruminate about it. And at the same time, if I am going through a loss, like I remember when my dad passed away, I mean, I had one of the most insensitive moments at our university. Some person came up to me who was kind of very uncomfortable about emotion. Understandably, this is just who this person was. And the person, to make me feel better, according to her perspective, she said, aren't you glad you teach those skills of emotional intelligence?
mm,
And I'm like, yes, but not because of coping with my father's loss, because of what I want to say to you. Um, you know, and it's like this discomfort that so many people have about just
mm,
a good friend or a colleague. We're not asking people to be therapists, right? But if someone is going through a hard time, like just go for a cup of coffee, you know, chat
mm,
with them for 5 minutes. Like that's going to help, in my opinion, create the healthiest of an organization.
mm. So, there's a way in which work is about productivity and about your commitment to the organization, but there's also a way in which work is about thriving, and we all need kind of room to thrive. How does attunement with your emotions and permission to feel support that?
Well, actually, I've done some research on this. I've done work with the students and the kids, but I've also done this at work. I've asked people in a more recent research project, do they feel like they have like a feelings buddy or coach or colleague, someone who's like an emotionally supportive person at work? This is one study, granted, I'm going to replicate and do more, but about 45% of people say they do have somebody, and which is greater than the people who said they had one as a kid. Only about a third of people said they had someone as a kid, and so that's
Mhm.
interesting in of itself. And my hypothesis is that it's a little easier at work because like we both go home at the end of the day, whereas to be that parent who is there continuously for their kid is tough. And I think parents also have a mindset, my job is to toughen my kid up to get them to be successful. Whereas those kinds of things are gone when we're in the workplace. We kind of can be colleagues and check in with each other. But for me, the most interesting thing is not that. The most interesting thing is how we describe these people.
Mm.
So, in the qualitative research, what I find are three core qualities of the feelings mentor when we're a kid, and they're the exact same attributes as the colleague. And the number one is non judgmental. Nobody wants to be around people who are judging them all the time.
Mhm.
The second is just listen. The third is compassionate. That's it. I mean, there are other little ones like warm and supportive, but if I were to, look at the in my other study, thousands of people in this new study in the workplace, all of the attributes, really the top three big ones: non-judgmental, active listening, and compassion.
Mm. It sounds like Carl Rogers.
I mean, what's fascinating to me, especially kind of where we work, is that no one ever says brilliant, smart, wise, problem solver. No one's looking for that. And I think that's what's
Mhm.
so interesting about this like weirdness that people have about people talking about their feelings, that we feel almost like obligated that we have to like fix their problem and move on when nobody's looking for that. People are just looking for someone to just let them be who they are, talk about it a little bit, and just show that you care.
Hmm. So you're talking about kind of receiving other people's emotions, this kind of interpersonal or kind of co-regulation approach. So you're talking about interactions in the workplace, in the
Yeah.
workplaces.
Although, interestingly enough, in the research, what I find is that people who have that kind of person as a kid or as an adult tend to have life satisfaction that's about 20% higher, purpose and meaning in life that's about 20% higher. They're better at dealing with their emotions, like better strategies. And given that only 35% of kids and 45% of adults say they have someone in their lives like that, I've gotten people get concerned. They're like, I didn't have that person. I don't have that person now. And my response to them is A, it's never too late. But B, in my words, you can be your own Uncle Marvin, right? We have to learn how to be non judgmental of our own lives, how to be good listeners to ourselves, and how to have self compassion. It can start there. It doesn't have to, we don't need to be waiting as adults, for that person, but we can seek them out.
Okay, so if there's all of the kind of interpersonal strategies and ways that you can be responsive to others that actually give people permission to feel, there are also things that you can do individually as self-regulation strategies.
Correct.
And one of the things that you can do are you actually using the same words? You can listen to yourself. You can be
Sure.
compassionate and yeah. Okay, so what does that look like?
I mean, just going back to, my morning of chaos, I could go down that rabbit hole. Mark, it's like you're 55, you're a professor of emotional intelligence, you should be more organized, you shouldn't be so, like, why are you so anxious? Like,
You
enough is
can
enough.
judge and critique yourself and try to
Yeah,
harangue yourself into
that's
different
what
behaviors.
self-criticism is, right? It's all judgment. That's what negative self-talk is. It's like, Mark, you're not good enough, Mark, you're not smart enough, Mark, you're not whatever enough. And we have to catch ourselves. I mean,
Mm,
it's so easy to go down that route because of the negativity bias that we all have, because we had no interventions when we were young. I mean, how many people, and my research shows, I'll just give you the answer, like nobody had a very adequate emotion education. I
mm,
mean, I always say, how many of you, when you're growing up in school or at home, had a parent or a teacher who taught you, a minimum of 10 evidence-based strategies to support you in regulating your emotions. And people are like, what are you talking about? Just like not part of, we don't operate as if that aspect of our development is something that needs to be nurtured.
Mm. And we need to learn basic emotions vocabulary. Can you talk a little bit through ruler, because it provides a framework for what you think this curriculum might actually be based on? No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ruler is based in all the theories of emotional intelligence that my mentors and your colleagues, at Yale created. Peter Salovey, our former president, and Jack Mayer. And they argued that, yeah, just like you can be smart academically, you can be smart about how you kind of understand and deal with your emotions. And what that means is that there has to be a set of skills. And I've thought a lot about these skills based on their theory. And the acronym that I use is RULER. R is recognizing. And this is tricky because recognizing emotions doesn't mean that I'm like 100% certain how you feel, Heidi. It just means that I'm paying attention to your facial expressions, your body language, your vocal tone, and I'm getting a feeling that something has shifted.
Okay. That's an
And
important nuance.
it is an important nuance because the goal of emotion recognition is not to be right.
Yeah.
The goal of emotion recognition is to build relationships with people so that we can be comfortable asking them, hey, just curious, how you feeling? I'm noticing something. We're never going to be accurate because, we have gender differences, we got racial differences, we got cultural differences. Nobody's, these stereotypes that we teach people as kids about, like, happy is and angry is, like, nobody
Mhm.
does that. How many people, SOM, when they're disgusted, go, ew. Yeah, nobody does that. We're doing micro
It's
expressions,
more subtle. Yeah.
much more subtle. Sometimes it's intentionally suppressed, right?
Yeah.
We engage in emotional labor so as to not show people how we really feel out of self protection.
Okay. Well, this is really important. This recognition of a shift is really different. And I can imagine that people might be thinking, especially if they're really on the kind of like in the judgment and critique, and like a lot of people in knowledge work make their living being right about things.
Right.
And so they might want to be right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Run away from being right because you're going to be wrong and you're going to make, attribution errors, as we call it.
Okay.
And so, and I'm sure that you in your life have experienced this, right? People have misread you, right? I've misread you before, just to be frank, right?
Well,
Because
I'm easy to misread, but that's the so that's one thing.
Well, but you're intense, and I'm people misread me all the time too because I'm always thinking like, oh, it didn't work, and people are like, what's wrong, Mark? I'm like, I'm just thinking about something, But like, if you just took my face for what it might be at face value for what you've been taught about emotion, you're thinking something's wrong, and you're wrong.
Mm.
And so, don't make
You're saying
assumptions.
that's actually okay. That's not the point. That's not the
Exactly.
point. Yeah.
The
Okay.
point is, don't go with that. The point is that you know build a relationship and find out how the person is feeling by asking them.
Yeah.
Now, granted, I've been with my husband, Horacio, who for 30 years. That's a lot of instances of emotion, right? Like
Yes.
he's a filmmaker, he's made a movie, he's lost a movie, things have worked out, things that haven't worked out. He's on the phone. I can tell through his vocal tone, like when he's disappointed. But it's because I have so much data to go on.
Mm.
And so, as we get to know people better, we get to know kind of their experiences and their responses and their feelings, and we can make better inferences.
Okay. Does everyone get better with experience and data?
Yes, people get better with, definitely. That's the way we learn.
Okay.
If we just live on assumption, we're not going to learn anything. But if we have, gosh, that something looked like something didn't go well on that call. Oh my God, I thought I got it, but I didn't get the job. Oh, no wonder. Like you had that facial expression. Then the next time it happens, oh, same different phone call, same facial expression. I've built a relationship. I've asked the questions. I've gotten the underlying reasons for that feeling. Now my accuracy rates will go higher.
Okay. And so you're not saying this kind of like intelligence kind of approach. I'm not hearing that in your language, that some people are going to be more nimble. You're really talking about a skill that can be built.
I think it is, and I think that the intelligence is actually noticing the shift and not making the assumption and doing the inquiry.
Okay. Well, that's very positive from a learning through experience. Like there's hope. You can actually get better by attuning in this direction and collecting
Definitely.
data about your colleagues. Right. But don't be attached to being right.
100, exactly. Just get away from that mindset because you're going to
Yeah.
be wrong.
Yeah. Okay. And be prepared for that. You might have some feelings about that, but it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the R. And it's
Mhm.
an interesting piece because historically, we took this very kind of basic emotion approach, which was that everybody across cultures, is happy, sad, angry, fear, surprise, disgust, contempt. And I just think that's a very archaic way of thinking about
Okay.
A, the emotion system, and B, how people express emotions. And a lot of it was faulty in the measurement, and
Okay.
that's too detailed. So,
No, it's helpful for people who are really diving in here and they want to actually get much more informed and nimble. And so you're also kind of upgrading our thinking. It's really upgrading mine. That this kind of idea of there are these seven basic emotions was not nuanced enough.
no,
And maybe it is universal and relevant, but it's just insensitive.
it's not even universal really, and there's so much granularity, in other cultures. Like in China, they have dozens of words in the shame family. We
Okay.
have we don't have that here. So their nuance, like it's the nuance that they're going to have around that experience of shame, because it's what we call a hyper-cognized concept,
Hmm.
right? It's just like it's salient, it's
Right.
relevant, and
Right.
so they're just
And
going
it's relevant in everyday actions. It's like so it's common knowledge in how people think about people and
to exactly.
themselves. Okay.
And family worth and family values.
Mm, okay.
There was one other thing I wanted to say about this, since we're getting going deeper, is that we also have to recognize that whatever cultural or racial biases that we grew up with are going to leak into our thinking about how people are feeling.
Okay.
And so, best example is, I'm not Asian. I'm a white Jewish guy from Jersey. And so I go over to Korea to do martial arts, and I'm just sort of like, everybody's gay here. It was just like all these men were hanging on each other and looked very like it was very like A, they looked feminine to me, and B, they were very like hanging on each other. And my assumption was like, wow, this is a whole new world.
Mm,
It's cultural difference.
mm,
Like this just even my martial arts master, who was like this like built dude, grabbed my hand to walk in the streets, and I'm a gay guy, and I was uncomfortable. I was like, wow, this is different, like,
mm,
so I'm coming in with like the preconceived notions about what it is around gender, around expression of emotion, and everything was shattered.
mm,
And so if you, again, non-judgment, listener, learner, like the better way to approach going to another culture, especially, is be the observer, ask the questions, be curious, because if you come in with your assumptions, you're probably going to make more mistakes.
mm. Is that recognition of bias part of an emotional wisdom?
Definitely.
Hmm.
Yeah, we have to become aware of it, because we need feedback, and so this is where like we have to become scientists about how we're thinking about our own emotions, but also about other people's emotions.
Hmm.
you know and so if I'm noticing like your facial expression is making this up, and I'm just going to be like really blunt, like, given that you're a black woman, right, there are biases in our society, that the angry black woman. And so I will probably, as a white male growing up in society, hearing about that, do more projection of anger onto someone who is of color
Hmm.
than not. And so that's a big deal. That's, think about arrest rates, think about, violence in our society. I really have to be aware, and say, wait, is this how this person is feeling, or is this how I think they're feeling?
Hmm.
And I can't, I can't assert that enough in terms of the importance, whether it's gender, whether it's race, culture. We've got to take that deep breath before we start making attributions, to make sure that we're in relationship as opposed to othering.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think I'm partly excited about the way that you're connecting this kind of bias and really the way that we read others with culture and demographics in there, and I'm partly like my heart is beating a little fast. Like, oh God, where is he going with this? You know?
I'm,
So,
like,
but
this is what it is, and it's not. Let me, and I'm making it sound like people are racist, which some people are, but it's not about racism necessarily. It's about Mark Brackett. I'll talk about me. I grew up in northern New Jersey. I'm a Jewish kid. I grew up in a very white Irish Catholic neighborhood. There was not very many Jews where I was. And so my friends, my neighbors, everybody I'm looking at is white and Irish Catholic. And that's where I got my training
mm,
to understand feelings.
mm,
I didn't, right? That's where my exposure. And
mm,
so I just had to be aware of that. I didn't grow up in New York City and in a school with like 57 cultures and, interacting with people who are Muslim and people who are Jewish and people who are from, wherever. Didn't have that exposure. So I'm just going to be biased because of my exposure.
okay. So you're bringing in a lot more
Oh,
contextual.
yeah.
So I mean, but I mean, this is how you're thinking about it, and it's different than when I've talked to you maybe 10 years ago
Yeah.
about recognizing emotion. I just want to acknowledge that you've got a lot more context. Now, I happen to be in a pedagogy of learning through experience. It's also a pedagogy of person and context, and
Yeah.
so I think you're really adding something really valuable and important for people to recognize, because I think your argument is coming from this idea of interrupting judgment and replacing it with openness and non-judgment and observation and curiosity.
100%.
Yeah. Okay. Beautiful. Well, so this is the beginning of Ruler. So we're only at R. Do you want
Right.
to
Oh,
continue?
sorry.
No, it's great. Keep going.
So, right, but that really, when you think about it, you know, determines the rest of the path. Because if I am misreading you as someone who is angry or something else, right, how I conceptualize how you're feeling is going to drive my behavior towards you.
Mm,
So, if I think you're angry, I might avoid you,
mm,
right? If I think you're pleasant and content and serene and open, I might approach you.
mm.
And so we need to be mindful that our behavior, oftentimes comes out of the feeling that we're having on the inside, right? I wake up in the morning, I'm kind of like, oh, feeling a little dread. Like, am I going to go to the gym? Maybe not, right? And the same thing applies to relationships. So
Okay, so let me just catch this just to thread in one piece. So learning through experience, part of the idea is that experience is much more micro than we think it is.
yeah,
And you just drew a line that actually we're having an experience with people before we start to speak. In that we're reading and recognizing, and that impacts us because we're already starting to have an experience. And where we go from there is actually dependent on what we're reading. So we have to be
yeah,
careful what we're reading so it doesn't skew too negatively or too positively,
well,
inaccurately.
inaccurately,
Yeah.
right? Because there's that toxic positivity stuff too. Um, so the U of ruler is understanding. And I think this, now that we're onto this kind of culture, nuance and bias thing, can't avoid talking about it there either. Because here's the thing: given my life experience, which now which involves abuse and bullying, my understanding, or my interpretation of someone who's angry might be really different than yours,
Mm,
right? Because I was, you know, punished, I was abused by people who had very strong emotions. And so that's all built into my brain. And
mm,
every time I experience that emotion, it's my whole life coming through.
mm.
It's not that like I'm just feeling angry in that moment because of the thing that someone said. That is built into going into my brain and being filtered through my entire life.
But isn't there healing? Isn't there progress? Isn't there growth? Wasn't this a long time ago? What do you mean it's built in? Is
It means there is, thank goodness, because of 10 years of therapy and 30 years of writing curriculum and teaching emotional intelligence and my uncle Marvin. And yes, I am blessed that I have really worked on myself. And but from a lot of people who don't have any intervention
mm,
or therapy, um, It's their fight flight constantly.
Okay.
But even with the intervention, I can't change my development. I can't change the fact, that I grew up with a father who was really angry, who, anger meant Mark was going to get hit, or Mark was going to get severely punished, or Mark was going to be told things that made him feel less than. And so, even as an adult now, I have a complicated relationship with anger.
Mm,
I'm much better at realizing, Mark, you're 55. Mark, you have a fifth-degree black belt. Mark, you're a professor. I got Mark. You got your strategies. Take a breath. Find your strategy. But I try to be real with people. Like, just because I'm a professor of emotional intelligence doesn't mean I've solved all of my life's challenges. I'm just better at identifying them, and I have more strategies to deal with them.
mm,
And that's one of my fears, about our society, is that, everybody has a story. A lot of us have different types of trauma and challenges, but nobody's really makes people feel safe and comfortable to talk about them, because there's a perception there's something wrong with you if that happened to you. And then nobody learns strategies.
mm,
So understanding emotion at its like basic level is understanding that I feel angry, um, because of my perceived injustice. And you, Heidi, given your life experience, you feel angry because of what you perceived as an injustice. So we're going to agree on the concept,
mm.
but we're not going to agree that what might make you feel one way or make me feel that way has to be the same thing.
So we have different experience in life, but we might have similar kind of emotions.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so, like, the job of being emotionally intelligent is to have empathy for people who are experiencing emotions, especially for those who feel them for reasons that you don't quite even understand.
Okay, great. So even though we're talking about you and understand, you're actually kind of talking about a deeper level of understanding
Yes.
at this point. That there's kind of comprehending what emotion is and what they mean and where it comes from, and kind of drawing a map of understanding. But then there's also being at peace that you actually may not comprehend people's own trajectories. You don't know their history.
Don't know it. I can relate to the best I can, but I mean, going back to the race example, my husband, Horacio, is Panamanian. We live in the countryside of Connecticut. We go to this restaurant, you know, New England, and the hostess looks at Horacio and says, "Where'd you get your tan?" You know, and he's like, looks at me, he's like, "My mother." And he manages it. He grew up in another country. He doesn't have the same kind of conceptions that we might have here, but it still hurts. It's still he's being othered. And so at dinner we talk about that, and like, I can relate to it because I love him and I understand his experiences, just like he doesn't know what it's like to be Jewish in America, right? So like, he may not really get the nuance of what it feels like right now with the amount of anti-Semitism there is. At a cognitive level, he'll get it, but at a visceral emotional level, he won't, because he's not it.
Mm, mm,
Just like at a cognitive level, I can imagine what it might feel like for him, but I've never had someone say anything like that to me. So
right.
I'm not gonna really be able to build that kind of strong connection until we talk about it. That to me is what understanding is. It's not just a cognitive piece of understanding that disappointment is about unmet expectations and anger is about injustice.
Mm,
It's about understanding that what I see and what you see as an injustice might be very different. And
mm,
our job is to talk about it and get to know each other better and support each other.
mm. Okay. And since we're kind of heavy in the kind of race and culture examples rather than the workplace examples, I just want to name. I know something that I just want to ask
Sure.
about.
Yeah.
This is your week when your film releases,
Yeah.
and I wonder if some of these ideas aren't even more on your mind because of the power of this important experience that's happening this
It
week.
is
Do you want to say
interesting.
something?
Um, yeah, our film is called America Unfiltered, and it's a listening tour of America. And Horacio is the filmmaker. I'm the sideline producer. But it was very interesting because going now we're gonna go. I'm gonna go political for a minute, But he went to Trump rallies and Biden rallies, and
Mm,
and just listened.
mm,
And gun shop owners and moms whose kids were murdered by the police, and undocumented immigrants who were trying to deport them.
mm,
And let me tell you, it is. There's an expression that we all know: you don't know someone until you know their story.
mm,
And I think that's part of emotional intelligence, is that until we get to know people's stories, we don't really know how to be with them or respond to them. And I
mm,
think that applies to the workplace. Yesterday, as you know, I took my team out we did a little boat tour, as a little kind of just fun thing to do together. And now that we're hybrid, and I travel a lot, it was meaningful for me. I got to sit with someone I never talked to really that much, because they don't report to me directly and things of that sort. And it just made me realize, you know, I need people who are smart, obviously, who understand the concepts, that can do the work. But I want people who want to be at work.
mm,
I want them to feel connected and supported and valued and appreciated. And that doesn't happen without relationships. There's no way someone can just, feel appreciated. It doesn't just happen. You have to do things to create those feelings.
So a lot of people are talking about this right now. What do we do about what people helping people want to be at work, want to contribute to a kind of thriving culture, want to contribute to a meaningful, robust workplace that's about, pulling together. How do we do that? Whether we've got kind of virtual or in person, how do we do that?
I think it's being intentional. And so, in our work, we ask people, like, the question, what emotions do you want to feel more at work? And then we also get into rich conversations about, well, what can we do together to create those feelings more frequently?
Mm,
And so that helps. It does help.
mm,
In my national research with teachers on this, who are people in the workforce, the number one hope for emotion over the last couple of years is appreciated. And when we asked them, well, what would make you feel appreciated? It wasn't a raise. It was being acknowledged.
mm,
You know, Educators in particular have been pummeled through the pandemic, with learning loss and all these different challenges.
mm,
And they feel like firstly, they feel like they're failing themselves, because they just think, I couldn't help these kids through this difficult time.
mm.
And, school boards and society is kind of like throwing them under the bus. It's like, why would we do that?
Right.
Why don't we, like, let's lift these people up and
Mm,
show our gratitude, and find out from them what they need to be their best selves in our
mm,
workplaces. And it's not, like I said, about the big raise. It's just about, like, other people saying something to them that lets them know that they're making a difference.
mm. Well, maybe the correlate to our expertise and judgment is our action of blame.
Yeah,
Yeah,
easier.
yeah. These
Same.
are
It's
more
part of
available.
it. Yeah. So I know we don't have a lot of time. So let me run through a ruler.
Yeah. Do you want to do it like from R to like, and I won't say anything so we can actually just get the whole picture for people who are really interested and I'm interested.
Yeah. So we've spent a lot of time on recognition of emotion and self and other, all those different components. The understanding is the understanding why, from a cognitive level, like that we have to have similar definitions of concepts, that anger is about injustice and disappointment is about unmet expectations. Then the L is getting granular. Is it fear or is it anxiety? Is it stress or is it overwhelm? Is it happy or is it excited or is it content? So that's the R, the U, and the L. I'll argue that that's all about knowing each other's experiences, our own and other people's. The E and the R ruler is all about what we do with our feelings. So, do I express them? Do I feel safe and comfortable with you, Heidi, to be my true self? Do you create the conditions where I feel I can be open? That's at home, it's at school, it's in workplaces, it's everywhere. Do we, what kind of policy do we have about just checking with people and listening to what they're going through? Um, and then the final R, which is, I don't know if you knew this, but it's the topic of my forthcoming book, which is called Dealing with Feeling.
Mm,
So I wrote a whole book it's finished, it's in press, on emotion regulation. Um, and so really been thinking obviously a lot about that over the last 3 years as I've been writing. Like, what do we do with our feelings? And I'll just give you the brief of that right now, which is the first is you got to give yourself permission to feel.
mm,
Right? It goes back to the beginning of permission to feel. And then there's a whole wide range of strategies, and that we've touched upon them here today. Um, the other one is knowing how you're feeling. So permission to feel is like no good or bad emotions. Emotions, I'm going to give myself. I am who I am. You are who you are. Then there's that labeling piece. Then I call this kind of regulation budget, which is how sleep and nutrition and physical activity all together inform your capacity to regulate. It requires fuel. As you know, like as a professor, you're teaching, like you're drained at the end of the day. You've depleted resources. And then you got to go home to your family, your kids. It's harder to regulate when you've been depleted of your brain power of basic neurochemicals, or just vitamins. Um, and then also, obviously, there's cognitive strategies, which we all know a lot about. You're a clinical psychologist, right? All the self talk, the reappraisal stuff, really important. And I think those are especially important when we're alone. You know, when I've gone through rough times, I do have my feelings mentor board, right? The few people that I can go to get that support.
mm.
But sometimes you're not with people. And so you don't have that social support system. And you've got to rely on yourself to say, Mark, you've had this, it's been a rainy day, like a lot of times in your life, and the next day has been sunny. Don't let this rainy day drive everything about your productivity, or your feelings. You can get through it. All that talk. And then finally, um, I think one of the other areas of interest of mine, and I think especially in the workplace where you focus,
Mhm.
is learning how to allocate time wisely.
Mm.
I think we underestimate that how we set up our day influences how we regulate. And so for me, because physical activity is important, um, if you look at my calendar, it's going to tell you I'm going to take a walk here, and I'm going to the gym here, and I put it on there because it's scheduled as part of my day. And I think that a lot of people in leadership positions or in management positions forget about themselves in terms of their well-being. And my argument is, even if it's lunch, it's been tough, but I try to do like mindful eating, which means that I don't do Zoom meetings or have phone calls for even 15 minutes. Just like, can I just sit and chew?
Mm. Mm.
And it makes a difference.
Right. This intentional dealing with these strategies, you're really. Oh. Do you have anything to any hope really that the kind of generative AI infusion is going to help us to be emotionally wiser in any ways?
I do. And as a matter of fact, we can wrap with
Yeah.
I can share about this app that I created,
Mm.
which is called How We Feel. It was created with the founder of Pinterest, Ben Silberman, and his team and my team worked together for the last 3 years on it. It's still growing, and we're incorporating AI in it, which is that after you check in with your feelings and journal about your feelings, and we've learned like how you've been regulating what's working and not working, the AI function will kind of make recommendations for you, you know.
Mm.
And we're going to add in things like your personality traits. So, like, if you're an introvert and you're angry, or you're, an extrovert and you're feeling down, like, what might the AI recommend to you? Not as a therapist, but as a list of ideas and strategies for you to try. We have about
Cool.
1 million people who've been using the app now, um, and it's been fun to have technology that can help people not only become more self-aware but also learn strategies to regulate.
That's really exciting. I know it got App of the Year or some kind of
Yeah,
app. Yeah, really wonderful. I'm excited about that.
thank you.
Well,
It's,
Mark.
by the way, the rule that we have is that we've got generous donations and we've made it free forever.
Mm, amazing. That is a beautiful place to end.
Yeah,
It's a beautiful place to end. Thank you so much for joining me on Learning Through Experience, Dr. Marc Brackett.
thank you.
Who's also my dear friend. We came to Yale in the same year, and so it's really fun to talk with you 20 something years later and to be continued.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
All right. Until soon.